Dean Martin was halfway through That's Amore when he stopped singing. Mid-verse, just stopped. The band kept playing for a few seconds, confused. Then they stopped too, one by one. Guitar, drums, piano, until there was complete silence in the arena. 10,000 people looked at the stage, wondering what was happening. Technical problem? Forgotten lyrics? Was Dean okay? Dean was staring into the audience, row 12, section C, looking at someone specific. He pointed. Sir, in the wheelchair. Can someone help him to the front? Security guards looked at each other, confused. The audience murmured. Who was Dean pointing at? A man in a wheelchair, mid-40s, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap, purple heart pin on his jacket, looking just as confused as everyone else. Dean walked to the edge of the stage, looked directly at the man. What's your name, sir? The man's voice came through faintly. Someone nearby had handed him a microphone. James Patterson, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. Dean nodded. How long you been back from Vietnam, James? 6 months, sir. Dean stepped completely off the stage, walked into the audience. 10,000 people watched in absolute silence as Dean Martin approached the wheelchair, got down on one knee so they were eye level. And then Dean said something that made the entire arena realize they were about to witness something extraordinary. You fought for this country. You gave everything. The least I can do is sing to you properly. This is the story of what happened that night in 1969 when Dean Martin stopped a sold-out concert to honor a veteran, when 10,000 people learned what real respect looks like, and when one paralyzed soldier got a moment that would carry him through the rest of his life. It was November 1969. The Vietnam War was at its peak. American soldiers were fighting and dying overseas. The country was divided. Protests in the streets, young people burning draft cards, politicians arguing, families torn apart over whether the war was right or wrong. But regardless of how people felt about the war, most Americans agreed on one thing. The soldiers deserved respect. They were doing their jobs, following orders, serving their country. Many of them didn't want to be there, but they went anyway because they were called. James Patterson was one of those soldiers. He'd been drafted in 1967, 23 years old, working as a mechanic in Ohio. Had a girlfriend named Sarah, plans to get married in the fall, dreams of opening his own auto shop someday. A normal life with normal dreams. Then his draft notice came. Brown envelope, official seal, report to duty. His whole life changed in that moment. James reported to duty. Basic training at Fort Benning. The physical training wasn't the hard part. James was strong, good shape. The hard part was knowing where he was going. Everyone knew. Vietnam. The war that was tearing the country apart. The war that was killing thousands of young American men.
Advanced infantry training, weapons training, jungle warfare tactics. 6 months of preparation for something you could never really be prepared for. In July 1967, James shipped out to Vietnam, arrived in Saigon. The heat hit him like a wall, the humidity, the smell, the reality that he was now in a war zone, that people would be trying to kill him, that he might not make it home. James served for 18 months, 1st Infantry Division, combat operations, ambushes, firefights, watching for any sign of danger, sleeping in mud, living in fear, losing friends. He saw things no 24-year-old should see. Friends killed, the line between right and wrong getting blurrier. But he did his job, took care of his men when promoted to squad leader, stayed focused on getting everyone home alive. Back home, Sarah's letters slowed, became less frequent, less personal. The final letter came. She'd met someone else, someone who was there, someone with a future she could count on. James read that letter in a foxhole during a rainstorm. He understood. War changes things, makes promises impossible to keep. In January 1969, James's unit came under heavy fire. Ambush. They were pinned down. James was a staff sergeant by then, in charge of a squad. His men were trapped, exposed, taking casualties. James made a decision. He moved forward, drew the enemy fire toward himself, gave his men time to find cover, to reposition, to survive. It worked. His men made it to safety, but James took 3 bullets, one in the shoulder, one in the lower back, one that severed his spine. He was paralyzed from the waist down, instantly, completely, forever. James was evacuated, field hospital, then Japan, then stateside, Walter Reed Medical Center. Months of surgery, physical therapy, adjusting to life in a wheelchair, learning to do everything differently. By November 1969, James had been home for 6 months. He was living with his parents in Las Vegas. His girlfriend had left him, couldn't handle dating a man in a wheelchair. His job at the mechanic shop wasn't possible anymore. He couldn't stand, couldn't reach, couldn't do the work. James was 45 years old, paralyzed, alone, trying to figure out what his life was supposed to be now. The one thing that helped was music, Dean Martin specifically. James had loved Dean since he was a teenager, that smooth voice, that casual style. Dean made everything seem easy, made life seem manageable. James carried a cassette tape of Dean's songs through Vietnam, played it until it wore out, got a new one, wore that one out too. That's Amore, Everybody Loves Somebody, Volare, songs that reminded him of home, of normal life, of a world where people weren't shooting at each other. When James heard Dean Martin was performing at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, he knew he had to go. It would be his first time out since coming home, his first attempt at doing something normal, something fun. The tickets weren't cheap. James was living on his military disability pay, but he saved, cut expenses, put aside money for 3 months, finally had enough for one.
Dean opened with "That's All Right," then "Ain't That a Kick in the Head?" The crowd was loving it. 10,000 people singing along, dancing in their seats, having the time of their lives. About 45 minutes into the show, Dean started "That's Amore," one of his biggest hits, one of James' favorites. The whole arena was singing along. Dean was halfway through the second verse when it happened. He stopped singing, mid-word. The band kept playing for a few seconds, then noticed and stopped too. Complete silence. Dean was looking into the audience, squinting past the stage lights, looking at something specific, someone specific. Then he pointed, directly at row 12. "Sir, sir, in the wheelchair, can someone help him to the front?" James felt his heart stop. Dean was pointing at him. Had to be. He was the only person in a wheelchair in that section. But why? What was happening? People around James turned to look at him. Security guards approached. "Sir, Dean wants you at the front." James didn't understand, but the security guards wheeled him down the aisle, past hundreds of people, all watching, all silent, wondering what was going on. They brought James to the front of the stage. Dean walked to the edge, looked down at James. "What's your name, sir?" Someone handed James a microphone. His voice shook. "James Patterson, Staff Sergeant, United States Army." "How long you been back from Vietnam, James?" 6 months, sir." "You got that Purple Heart for a reason." "Yes, sir. January this year. My unit was under fire. I got my men to safety, took some bullets." Dean nodded slowly. The arena was completely silent. 10,000 people listening to this exchange. "You saved your men?" "Yes, sir. That was the job." Dean looked at James for a long moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He stepped completely off the stage. No steps, just jumped down, walked across the arena floor to where James sat in his wheelchair. The crowd gasped. Dean Martin, in the middle of a sold-out concert, was walking into the audience.
approaching a veteran in a wheelchair. Dean got down on one knee, put himself at eye level with James, looked him in the eyes, man to man, veteran to civilian, hero to entertainer. "You fought for this country," Dean said. His voice was quiet, but carried through the arena's speakers. "You gave everything. You sacrificed your body, your future, so people like me could stand on stages and sing songs, so families could go to concerts and be safe. The least I can do is sing to you properly, not from up there," he gestured to the stage, "but here, like a person, like someone who understands what you gave up." James had tears running down his face. So did half the people in the arena. Dean smiled, that famous Dean Martin smile, warm, genuine. "You ready for That's Amore, James?" James nodded, couldn't speak, too emotional. Dean began singing, no microphone, no band, just his voice, just for James, but quiet enough that the whole arena could hear if they stayed silent, which they did. Absolutely silent. 10,000 people.
The arena erupted. 10,000 people on their feet, applauding, cheering, crying. Not for Dean, for James, for what he'd done, for what he'd sacrificed. Dean helped security guards wheel James back to his seat. Then Dean climbed back on stage, wiped his own eyes, took a breath, and continued the concert. But something had changed. The energy was different. The crowd was more emotional, more aware, more grateful, because Dean had reminded them what really mattered, that beyond the entertainment, beyond the fun, there were real heroes in the audience, real people who'd sacrificed for their country. After the concert, James sat in his wheelchair, holding Dean's handkerchief, crying. His father found him. "You okay, son?" "Dean Martin just sang to me," James said. "Just to me, like I mattered." "You do matter," his father said. "You always did. Dean just made sure everyone knew it." But Dean wasn't done. That night, back in his dressing room, Dean called his manager.